Appamada and its programs are supported by your generosity, and your generosity and support makes such a difference. You can find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
All right, before we get started, I'm giving you an assignment. So I'm curious to know what your kind of vibrant practice question is right now. What is it that you're wondering about your practice, or curious about, or keep bumping up against? So think about that for a moment. If you could distill it down into a few sentences without having to even disclose the content, really. What's your practice inquiry, your practice question now? So I'm going to ask that in a moment. If you don't want, you can just pass and come around to you. My name's Todd Bankler. I'm one of the entrusted teachers here, and we have a Peg sighting. So Peg's back to her old haunts here in Austin. She's joined us for about a week, so it's so nice to have Peg back here. It's kind of especially touching for me to see you in this house that you originally bought just to live in like a normal person, and then somehow got off track and turned into this Zen practice center that's still thriving even though you moved away. So it's nice to have you back here. So today I want to bring to you a little Dharma talk. So this portion of the program is a little mental food, a little food for thought, a little chance to discuss what you're noticing and what you're curious about, what comes up in this practice in the way that we take it on here. I always like to just first say the only reason I do these talks is to hopefully provide a little bit of encouragement to keep going, because it can be a long and winding road, and we can often confuse ourselves about what we're doing and what we think we're doing, and it can be difficult to continue. So this is just a bit of encouragement for you to continue the practice, which is what we do for 2 hours before we get to the portion of the talk, and then we talk for just 15 or 20 minutes. So I always call that out to people. The majority of what we're doing here is not about our ideas and talking about it. It's really about sitting and practicing. But the talking is good. It really helps find some clarity for the practice. So with that, what is your alive practice question right now? What are you turning over? What are you curious about? Let's just go around the room and state your name so we get to know each other's names as well. And then briefly, if you want to share, what is your practice question right now? So I'm going to start with Joel because I see you right there in front of me.
The universe is alive, constantly unfolding, constantly changing. And I just have not yet moved past the thought that I'm somehow separate, that I'm like the guy that's trying to polish a tile into a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm doing.
Thank you. I said Peg for last. Kim?
Not fair.
The first question that came to mind is, does it ever end? Now, I'm Kim.
Yes.
I'm Timothy. I'm new here. Because I'm wondering how to progress in my practice.
Thank you.
Susan, and I think probably my practice question now is how to be kind to those closest to me in my loved circle.
We'll move back.
Yes, I'll pass.
Okay. Passing is acceptable, everyone.
I'm Brian.
my practice question right now is, how do I shift more frequently from the self-centered viewpoint to a more generous offering of myself, with myself not quite at the center?
I'm Larry in El Paso.
Marilyn, and I'm curious about how to use what I'm learning.
Sean, I'm new to Zen, but I have a meditation practice, so I'll share what I'm currently bumping up against there. So recently, surrender, I guess, has been coming to mind, and just kind of how that's a paradox where if you become aware that to, I guess, see reality more accurately, it requires surrender of self, but then the minute you become aware of it, then it becomes another, thing for you to try to do. And just kind of trying to square that and settle it in the end, you'd be there.
Thank you.
I'm Helene. It's my first day here, so I'm really new, and I'm thinking about, I'm a scientist, and I'm thinking about how much do I turn on the scientist and turn off the scientist as I'm learning about this practice.
Darcy.
Yeah, I'm Darcy, and my big practice question is that I have great pain and great joy, and how to hold both all the time.
I'm Neil. I don't know if this is a question that necessarily has an answer per se, but something I've been thinking about is also the sort of paradoxical nature of trying not to have like a attachment to outcome, but at the same time, like sort of wanting that outcome, but like trying to like trick the mind into like not thinking about that, getting the result at the same time. That sort of paradox and how that like it seems to apply to a lot of different things in sort of like Zen or meditation sort of realm. Just that whole concept.
I'm Joan, and having heard everyone else, I go, yeah, that one. But what I'm working on is living practice in my life.
I'm Lori, and I'm practicing with two things. One is acceptance, particularly acceptance of self, and acceptance in general, and also letting go.
Well, my practice question is really how to best serve this wonderful Sangha in my new location. So I moved to Illinois to be closer to my granddaughter and my sister and family. And at the same time, I'm, of course, very, very deeply bonded with everyone in Sangha. So the question is, how do I serve the Sangha from a distance, right? So I'm happy to be back here and plan to come back here. It's regular intervals, so I can bask in your presence, which is my great delight. And I would say to you, don't lose your scientist, don't lose any part of it. Keep the inquiring scientific mind, and none of it needs to go away.
Thank you. And let's not forget about everyone online. So I'll just call out names and ask you to speak up. So we'll start with you, Claudine.
Okay. My practice is how to stay open with people when my security becomes less, if you understand what I mean. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen? Hold on, you're still muted, Ellen. There you go.
Yeah, what is way-seeking mind?
Thank you. Nellie?
No question. Thank you.
Thank you. I have trouble reading it. Maria Sullivan? Marla. Thank you. I couldn't read that. Couldn't read that far.
As I deepen my practice, I'm studying the precepts, and a practice question I have is the precept about avoiding intoxicants. How do I ensure that my practice itself doesn't become an intoxicant?
Yeah, good one. Rosemary?
Hi, I'm working with my attachment to accomplishments and shifting into seeing them as offerings. Thank you.
Kathy?
I'm attempting to be with people with opposing ideas, and to be patient and to offer what I can in a peaceful way.
Elizabeth?
Hello. My practice for October is stopping the war within, which sounds a little intense, but for me, just kind of holding it lightly as kind of like a light inquiry, that idea of reaching out and kind of bothering things over here and sort of kind of interrupting that process. So yeah, that's my inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you. Milan?
Hello, my question has to do with continuity. Continuity.
Continuity, thank you. And I think that just leaves you, our lovely monitor, Nancy. Thank you for helping out.
For me right now, my mind just think about my cat, and my question is, how can I know if like he really want to come here and stay with me, or he enjoy their life in the temple?
Thank you.
She got this cat when he was only 2 weeks old. And then when she moved, she left him at the Buddhist temple where they're taking care of him. Yeah. And, you know, she's trying to decide whether to bring him to where she is.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. It's, I think, so helpful for others to hear, you know, what's coming up in your practice, what you're becoming aware of, you know, what you're turning over in your mind and maybe struggling with, because I think they're so universal. You know, people pointed around and said, oh yeah, that one. We're all in this together, and it turns out we're mostly heading in the same direction. And so it's good to have buddies as we stumble and bumble along. And it's good for me and those of us who have to sit in this chair to hear from you guys about how it's going, you know, what you're noticing. I really don't have much, you know, will to come up here and hear myself talk and decide what to talk about. And, you know, I would much rather talk to you guys and find out what's going on. But today I thought I would talk a little bit about softening the idea of self. So Suzuki Roshi, he used that term quite a bit. And for those who don't know, Suzuki Roshi was one of the Japanese citizens who came over to the US in the 60s or 50s or 60s, started the San Francisco Zen Center, and that's part of the lineage that we're in. So he would talk about the idea of self. What small mind, and in Zen we tend to use the term small mind and big mind, small mind being the brain in your head and the conditioned ways that it was brought up, belief systems and ideas that it has, and big mind being the one that holds that, the universal activity that isn't limited by your small mind. So just some definitions as we go. So the idea of self, have you ever, try and think back at the last time you spoke out loud to someone else and you used the word I in the sentence. That'll give you an indication. It comes up all the time. Like, well, I'm a runner, so on the weekend, I wasn't raised that way. Any of these little I sentences give you little windows into this idea of self. Right? Our egoic ideas of who we think we are, who we think we should be, what we should be doing. It's a wonderful framework for managing our way through our ordinary life. But it also turns out it can be a little bit limiting. Our idea of self can cause us to kind of wander and bumble about a bit, to stay on a particular track because we think that's what we're supposed to do. It limits our freedom. It limits the improvisational virtuosity is the term that's been used, our ability to just respond to what is. Often we may find ourselves responding to what we think is happening, what we know we're sure is I know what he's doing, right? I know what he's doing. Right? I'm going to respond to that. Yeah, I too. Yeah, I'm sure. Right? Instead of being open and available to what's actually happening. So Suzuki Roshi would talk about our idea of self and how it could limit our composure in the present moment. Often when we talk in Zen, it sounds very paradoxical because we're trying to use the kind of limited form and language that we have on our everyday way of looking at the world to try and break that same way of looking at the world up a bit, to kind of soften it, release it, and find a new way. Suzuki Roshi would also say that one of the most important teachings is not two, not one. He say our body and minds are not two and not one. If you think your body and your mind are two things, that's wrong. If you think your body and mind is one thing, that's also wrong. And this applies to yourself and other, not just body and mind, yourself and other, you as a separate self versus the Sangha that we're practicing in. The relative and the absolute, kind of the noumenal and the phenomenal, not two and not one. So how is it that we can be wrong about both of those, right? So it seems paradoxical. How is it not two and not one? It's because it's trying to leap clear of the way of compartmentalizing things into categories, right? It's anti-categorical. It's like, no, not two, not one, stop. Just stop. And it's a similar thing to our idea of self. We have these ideas. I'm a scientist. I have a way of looking at the world. It's a very helpful framework. But it's so useful to be able to set these things down on occasion. Peg often used to like to say that Zen was a-perspectival, meaning a or against, anti perspective. In other words, it could take any perspective. Our practice is to hold our particular idea of self lightly, to understand it to be provisional, like a Mercator projection of a map of Canada. It gets pretty, it'll help you find the way, right? But it kind of skews off everything. That landmass looks huge, right? Well, that's because you've got a flat piece of paper representing the world, right? It's the same kind of thing with our ideas of self. They're very useful, but they're often a skewed perception based on our own cultural conditioning, family of origin, background, everything that we bring to it. So practice asks you, can you soften this idea of self? Can you see it when it comes up? Can you question it and bring forward beginner's mind, the mind of a child that's curious, that wonders about it? Oh, I wonder if that's true. I wonder if I really am a runner and should be doing this. Or is that just something I do? It's a very useful practice to be able to, on purpose, try and take these other perspectives when you notice you have one. Oh, I really have a strong opinion that life should be X. She should be Y. I invite you, the next time you catch yourself doing one of those things, think for a moment what an opposite perspective might be. Think for a moment, if a third person, a stranger witnessing this, what do I think their perspective might be? And then see if you can inhabit that perspective. Start by thinking it. See if you can feel it. See if you can find it in your body. The ability to hold your perspective lightly, not abandon it, but to be able to not be dragged along blindly like it, is a very liberating practice. Suzuki Roshi used to say, another thing he used to say is, if you're fooled by others, it's not so bad. But if you fool yourself, it can be fatal. So we have to watch for all the little ways that we fool ourselves, all the little ways that we're attached and stuck on our idea of self, where we need to soften a bit, where we need to let the world in all of its myriad possibilities and myriad forms that often really aren't the way I was wanting it to be. And working on our acceptance. Because I got news for you. By the time you noticed it, it already is. At that point, your only choice is to accept it as step one. That doesn't mean you don't do anything for step two, but step one has always got to be accepting it. So I'm really curious about softening this idea of self, finding some freedom in the life that you have that holds your opinions of it lightly, but doesn't go to the other guardrail that I don't know anything and have to ignore what I want. How do we soften this idea of self? What do we get out of it? I'm curious to hear your comments or reflections on it. And for the record, I don't think I answered a single question, so success. Yes, John.
Well, when I came to this practice, I had a cement concept of self. And I couldn't understand there not being, that is not true. And it's only happened through listening to other ways of seeing the world, and especially my scientific background has helped me to Joanna Macy's looking at the world as a system, that I am part of something bigger. I'm it's not I'm part, I am something bigger, just a little part of, it's the part is separating. And it's just been a long process that required work, a lot of work.
I was just thinking that it's hard to predict what your future self is going to need. So I think that's why you have to stay curious, because you never know how, what you're doing now is if you're gonna look back and thank your old self for doing this, or regret something you did. But just thinking about how we evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's best not to maintain a fixed view. Right. Yes.
I'm thinking, since we're mentioning science, of the 3 states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas, and then what I've come to, start to recognize is this 4th state that's not a material state, and putting self into that category, that it's something ethereal and limitless, and all that helps me, I think, soften the idea. There's nothing you can point at or hold or.
I was recently reading Stephen Batchelor's book. Oh, sorry, is there somebody?
I think maybe you need to speak up.
Oh, I was recently reading Stephen Batchelor's book, Buddhism Without Beliefs, and paraphrasing, I think, but I think at one point he advises people to look at the idea of self as more of like a amalgam or conglomeration of processes that are all sort of working together, and in our minds and in our language we call that self, but really it's nothing so concrete or fixed as what we're usually culturally and just naturally led to believe, which I thought was a helpful way of looking at it.
What popped into my head was SOS, the self-operating system.
I'll say something. Oh, sorry, somebody else.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I've recently resigned a tenured position as a professor. And so I'm in the process of shedding that identity, which has been a strong one, right? And so there's both a little bit of sadness around that and even confusion, but what I've really focused on instead is like the liberation, like, oh, okay, what next? Like anything really. And so just keeping open that sense of possibility, which is also has to do with de-identifying and letting go of that, almost a cemented type of persona. So it's a process too, for sure, just the letting go. Yeah.
Yes, Joel.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about how I would never know about shedding identity, about all the ways that I'm hooked into my identity, except that they pop up when I'm trying to sit still and be present in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's on the one hand, that revelation, or those millions of revelations, moment by moment, help me a lot. And they also help me see that there's a space around them that is not caught up with me trying to construct that or reconstruct those things that I think I'm losing, you know. Those things I get angry about or mourn over about myself. And that this just glimpse of freedom around the edges of the things I'm bumping up against is a wonderful gift that I have only been able to experience with teachers, great teachers, and with the generous support of so many people.
Those online are welcome to speak up as well. You can just wave or raise your hand.
I think Sangha is kind of a wonderful kind of arena for that kind of play of little experiments in mindfulness, releasing some aspect of ourself or practicing from a different perspective, because it's kind of a safe environment. This is what we're all doing together, and we have a shared understanding that, oh, we're all trying to wake up together, and we're all trying to help each other and support each other in waking up. So there's an opportunity there to play with the sort of fixed notions of self we might have in do little experiments in mindfulness and see what happens.
Darcy.
Yeah, so that kind of ties into what I was going to say, and then I'm thinking about these parts of self. It's not just realizing them, I'm thinking about Lori saying accepting and letting. It's like you can see them, but it's what's in between there and letting go. And if I reach out and connect, or someone reaches out and connect, and a lot of these exercises have been doing this, that provides the grease or the lubricant that does a lot of it, softening.
Mm-hmm.
Rosemary.
Hi, thank you, Todd. I was listening to the person, I think is it Susan, who was talking about resigning her position? Yeah, hi, Susan. Can't exactly see you, but see part of you. Thank you. And I too am not completely resigning. I'm retiring mostly from my private psychotherapy practice at the end of the year, and struggling quite a bit, but trying to feel what you were talking about is the liberation of more time to explore. This practice actually is what got me to thinking about this in the first place, that I could tolerate that much spaciousness in my life. And I'm learning that I can, but this will be a new step. And as Susan was talking, I was thinking about, okay, so I will be released from these responsibilities and into a spacious field, and to not feel afraid of, I guess, falling, maybe, like I'm thinking of, I'm jumping off the cliff, I'm just out there, and well, fall, it's going to happen. And then I thought of the net of Indra, and I thought, okay, this Sangha is kind of like a net. And yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts about whatever we're talking about. I'm not sure. Thank you.
I just want to add on to that, as both Joel, you've talked, and Rosemary, that there's also, that has connected with the excitement I feel about shedding an identity. You never know what it's like to shed a strong identity unless you shed it or step away from it. And that's exciting, actually. Like, whoa. So there's that aspect too.
Yeah, oftentimes one of the fundamental teachings that we learn in a practice like this is finding our composure in uncertainty. And we try and give that in little doses and not scare you with the fact that everything's uncertain all the time. Maybe you realize that later. Maybe you realize that truth later. But the composure and uncertainty is a great fruit of the practice. And a saying I love that comes from somewhere in pop culture, this is not a Zen thing, Rosemary, but you maybe think of it, was when you feel yourself falling, dive.
Yeah.
Oh, Nellie.
Yeah, what Rosemary and Susan just said, I had a phase in my life in which I was also feeling the same, that everything was falling apart. And it was really good for my practice because I realized that I was not falling anywhere and that everything was just there all the time in front of me. And I think what helps me a lot about being aware that self doesn't really exist is how impermanent we are. Like everything is impermanent and we're always interconnected with everything, and our thoughts are evolving all the time because of all the stimulations of what is in front of us all the time. And I can really feel how I'm changing all the time, actually. And that's our identity. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Nellie brings up a good point that there are those of us who say, you know, I still feel like I'm 30 or whatever, you know, that we are tied into this picture of ourselves. And by letting go of that and seeing that we are changing in every moment, and that's letting go of this concrete idea of self.
Mm-hmm. Rosemary, did you raise your hand again or is it still up? Okay, she raised her hand. All right, go ahead.
Okay, yes, so I was thinking about this, how we really are changing all the time. I was thinking about a flower, right? A flower is, you know, before it opens, and even when it's open, it's still, things are really happening there, but we don't see it. And I think that's, you know, what happens with us. I mean, I'm talking about myself now. So I'm sure that a lot of change, you know, it's happening all the time. But for me, in the last 2.5 years with this practice, it's really moved a lot, but I don't really see, you know, I don't really see it. And I think that could be really helpful to me at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
One thing that's coming up for me that's come up in my practice recently is, you know, in terms of softening sense of self. I feel like, at least how it feels to me is like I don't want to say like the D word on my first time here, but like it's like death, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like it is when we struggle to let go of aspects of ourselves, it's like we're afraid of letting a part of us die. But for me, what helps me navigate that is just the belief that no matter what, something's going to be reborn afterwards. It's just the nature of reality. Even if I were to literally die, some part of my consciousness, some part of my being is going to be given back to the universe and be reborn as something. And then I think that's where the excitement that was kind of talked about is before, is that rebirth process. Once you cross that threshold beyond that fear into whatever that rebirth takes is when you find the excitement in it. But as you're approaching it, it definitely feels like, I don't know where the hell I am. I don't know what's going on. It's great.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, it's 10:45. So I thank you so much for your wholehearted participation. We really helped to open each other up. So thank you for that.